you, thank you. Whoa! No flash photography, please. I'd like to make a statement about my second place victory. Take that, Garlips. You prick.
Stay away. この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Welcome to SushiBites. Not too long ago, I played a lot of Klonoa 2. This was practice for a close-fought speedrun race where I managed to just cinch a second-place victory over Garlips. Big props to Garlips and Adrienne's Revenge for being such good sports, and the Wheel of Struggle for putting on such a good race.
Draven has ended up saying, I'm very proud of ERB for getting second place considering he only practiced today.
I only practiced today, outside of the playthrough I did casually in November.
Oh, there we go, and Garlips has just finished as well now. There we go.
That was close! What the fuck?
It was a great race. Check it out if it interests you. All this Klonoa got me thinking that the series is just as much a Japanese game as anything else we'd take a look at here on SushiBites. While it's fresh in my mind, let's discuss the first two Klonoa titles, Daughter Phantomile and Lunatea's Veil, as part of the Phantasy Reverie Series, and briefly touch on some of the other Klonoa titles that are available outside of the collection. So you're probably here because you know what Klonoa is, but to briefly go over it, Klonoa is this dog-cat thing. That's everything you need to know. Oh, and his games quite often deal with the concept of dreams and nightmares. Very wholesome stuff for growing kids. Lots of existentialism to get buried in the brain later to trigger anxiety attacks in your 30s. How oddly specific. This is Klonoa's first appearance, Daughter Phantomile. Released for the original PlayStation in very late 1997 in Japan and across 1998 elsewhere. This title saw a Nintendo Wii remake in 2008, courtesy of Nintendo's workhorse Payon, which serves as the basis for the version you're seeing, included on 2022's Phantasy Reverie Series collection. I have a factory sealed copy for PlayStation 5. Wait. PlayStation 5 doesn't have any games. This is an illusion. Crazy. In Daughter Phantomile, Klonoa has a dream where he pulls a ring out of the ground, and from the ring spawns a little floaty boy named Hupao. They have such wonderful adventures, but Clodoggo wakes up sad because it was all a dream. But it wasn't all a dream. Hupao and the magical ring are real, after all. Something's fishy about that. Defining what kind of game this is can be challenging, almost as challenging as the game itself, but I would describe it as a puzzle platformer. The gameplay mostly takes place within 3D space, but from a 2D perspective. Klonoa can move left and right across the level, he can jump and float in the air for a short moment, and he can shoot a wind bullet out of his ring, though not very far. They act like it's a big deal, but I shoot wind bullets out of my ring multiple times a day, and people just tell me to stop farting. Klonoa's wind bullets have a special function. Not only can they activate various objects within each stage, they can also capture enemies. Then Klonoa can fire these enemies in front of himself or use them to perform a double jump. In development essays posted on the Namco website shortly after the game's release, project director Tsuyoshi Kobayashi explained that this change in function came late in development, as previously Klonoa had used 3 buttons instead of 2, one to jump, one to shoot his wind bullet, and one to place an enemy in front of him to use as a weighted object for pressure plates or to jump on. Because the change came so late in development, only one stage used the double jump to its full potential, the game's final hidden level, Extra Vision. I very briefly touched on the story, as I would hate to spoil too much of it for any prospective players. In basic terms, Klonoa and Hupao find themselves caught up in the affairs of a menacing figure named Garlips and his partner in crime, Joker. Klonoa manages to retrieve a moon-shaped pendant that Garlips has been looking for, which can be used to plunge all of Phantomile's citizens into never-ending darkness and nightmares. That's just the tip of the storyberg. As titles that are heavy on story and feature relatable, aesthetically pleasing characters with multi-layered personalities, the mainline Klonoa title's strongest element are their stories, so I don't want to spoil them. It should come as no surprise, Door to Phantomile's story is very fondly remembered. Development director Hideo Yoshizawa had always sought to emulate movie-style storytelling in his works, writing the entire screenplay for and directing the first Ninja Gaiden on NES, and being heavily involved in the story for the second title. Yoshizawa-san instead opted for a different approach with Klonoa, explaining in the development essays that he sought to tell a story which could only be told through the medium of video games. After coming up with the beginning and the ending of the game, Yoshizawa-san and Kobayashi-san worked together and managed to flesh out the rest of the game's story fairly quickly. Moved by what they had created, Yoshizawa-san snuck the sentimental message Dear 10 Memories in the game's credits, in honor of it being his 10th project and due to it having such a hugely positive impact upon him. Phantasy Reverie Series is not the best way to play Klonoa Door to Phantomile. The game contains heavily compressed audio, and being based on the Wii title, is missing a lot of the quaint sprites that formed the game's original iconic look. However, it is definitely the most accessible version of the game today, having been released for all current consoles and Steam. As for playing the game as it was originally intended, Klonoa is shockingly absent from the PlayStation Classic console released in 2018. Otherwise, I would have steered you in that direction as a cheaper alternative to buying a physical copy of the original. Ouch.
Alright, fares up. Which of you haven't subscribed?
After Door to Phantomile, a Klonoa title was released in Japan exclusively for Bandai's WonderSwan, a handheld console with similar specification to the original Game Boy. The title, Klonoa Moonlight Museum, is a much more puzzle-oriented game, and was in development alongside the next numbered sequel, Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil. Moonlight Museum is more of an obscurity these days. In this game, there are blocks that can be captured with your wind bullets, in the same way you might capture enemies, bringing back the placing and jumping on enemies to progress concept that was dropped for the first game. Moonlight Museum was never re-released or remastered in any way, though its DNA would live on in the Game Boy Advance Klonoa games that followed. Maybe we'll talk about it in more depth in a follow-up episode sometime. Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil is the other game included in the Phantasy Reverie Series collection. I have fond memories of the game, having played it as a child, purchasing it with Christmas money because the dog on the front looked like adventure-era Sonic the Hedgehog. 12-year-old me was incredibly disappointed when the game played absolutely nothing like how he was expecting, with its slow, cumbersome puzzle platformer gameplay. Since revisiting the game in November last year, I was simply floored by how good the game has remained. 12-year-old me had no idea what he was shitting on, which is why he left so much mess on the living room sofa. The original PS2 release is notoriously buggy to emulate, and has several game-breaking glitches on backward-compatible PlayStation 3 consoles. Door to Phantomile getting a remaster or re-release was not unusual, but Bandai Namco choosing to remaster Lunatea's Veil as well? That was the shocker. Gone is the attractive cel-shading art style, but in its place are higher resolutions, improved textures, and a more consistent frame rate. And of course, the game is now more widely accessible, considering the issues it has on emulators and on backward-compatible PS3s. Klonoa 2 Lunatea's Veil starts with Klonoa finding himself in a completely different world to the previous two games, managing to find himself almost drowning in a salty sea made of tears. Naturally, this takes place after my race with Garlips, because the sea is made of his salty tears. Rescued by the priestess in training Lolo and her feisty friend Popka, Klonoa finds himself once again embroiled in another battle against good and evil. Klonoa and friends are seeking to ring 4 bells, one in each kingdom, to bring about everlasting peace and harmony, and to help Lolo become a fully fledged priestess. A pirate named Leorina seeks to make the 5th bell appear, one that if rang will bring the world into sorrow and suffering. Not too far from what Guardius had previously intended to achieve in the first game. Also, not unlike Guardius, Leorina is also accompanied by a partner in crime, this time being Tat, a cat and certified Mesugaki who derives great pleasure from teasing Klonoa and Popka. This cat is begging to be corrected. Again, there's much more to Klonoa 2's story and characters, and again I am choosing not to spoil any of it. Things continue to escalate and eventually end up becoming more and more existential. It's like watching the original ending to Evangelion in a way. Less congratulations, more noxious fumes and nightmarish wastelands. The game itself really is much more of the same, with puzzles that are more taxing and confusing with a greater emphasis on action. While I consider it the weaker of the 2 games, Lunatia's Veil has many more interesting set pieces and much more varied environments and puzzles, an astounding sequel to an already exquisite first game. The Phantasy Reverie series may not be the best way to play through Door to Phantomile, but as a double set of bangers, it really cannot be beaten in that regard. If anything you saw from Door to Phantomile or Lunatia's Veil interests you, I can highly recommend this collection. Before we finish off here, we will briefly address the remaining 4 Klonoa titles that were released, but I'm not ruling out a deeper dive at another time. In the same year as Lunatia's Veil, Empire of Dreams was released for the Game Boy Advance. It is, for all intents and purposes, a sequel to the Wonder Swan title. The mechanics are the same, though now the game has color graphics and greater background and sprite detail. As with Moonlight Museum, the game is quite puzzle-focused, swapping action for more methodical, precision-based gameplay. In 2002, Klonoa Beach Volleyball would be released for the PlayStation in Japan and Europe. And this is a weird one. A volleyball spin-off featuring characters from Door to Phantomile, Lunatia's Veil, and characters who were introduced in that year's Game Boy Advance entry, Klonoa 2 Dream Champ Tournament. Dream Champ Tournament was much the same as Empire of Dreams released before it, though with many new characters. These characters being in Klonoa Beach Volleyball makes for an interesting quandary. Guntz and Garland appear in Dream Champ Tournament, which was only released in Japan in 2002 and North America in 2005. Beach Volleyball was released in Japan and Europe in 2002, so Europe misses out completely on the context for these characters. I bet that confused a lot of players back in the day. The last wholly new Klonoa title was released right at the end of 2002, exclusively in Japan, Klonoa Heroes Densetsu no Star Medal. This is a top-down action RPG, a massive departure from the rest of the series. I don't have very much to say about this one because it had an English fan translation, which makes it a possible SushiBites subject at some point in the future, so I kind of steered away from it for the time being. You never know. We haven't heard from our big-eared cat-dog friend for a few years now, besides the collection in 2022 and the Udon webcomic, which ended in a cliffhanger in 2014. Maybe in the future we can look back on this episode and laugh! Like we can with my Silent Hill episode, where I mourned the franchise's death right before a whole bunch of projects got leaked and then announced. And with the series only existing now as merchandise on the Konami store, it has joined a whole batch of other beloved franchises that now live on only within our hearts. Here's hoping, eh? This has been SushiBites. Thanks for watching.